Hello Canadian gardeners, cold climate gardeners, and gardeners of the extremes. How are you guys doing today? If you're new around here, my name is Ashley and I'm a soil scientist. On this channel, I take that science and I apply it to all things gardening, but also plant care. So if you like the sounds of that, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. In today's video, we are doing a video on how to exactly plant fall bulbs so we have spring blooms and garlic next summer. And this is kind of a secondary video to the video I did last week where we actually talked about fall bulbs and the science behind why bulbs need to be planted in the fall versus the spring, how to store them if we've forgotten to actually put them in the ground before the snow flies, or if you're in a really warm or hot climate, how to store them year after year to ensure that you can still enjoy things like tulips or other cold climate bulbs, flowers, and plants. This video, I'm going to be showing actual footage of me planting these bulbs in the ground and kind of the process I go through and why I do it the way I do it. The reason I have to do my videos this way is because I live near planes, trains, and automobiles, and it is very loud outside, and anyone who also is from Saskatchewan this year knows about the wind that we've been having. And yesterday, the day that I decided to actually plant my bulbs, was horrendously windy, so you would never have been able to even hear me over the mic to begin with. So I hope you don't mind, but to give you guys good quality videos where you can actually hear what I'm talking about, but you can see the imagery as well, I do need to do it this way, so sorry. I'm going to be planting my alum, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a really beautiful globe type flower. It's purple. Purple is my favorite color. And then also garlic. These are the two fall bulbs that I am doing this year. That is it. That is all. But the methods that I'm applying, especially to the alum, will work for any sort of cut flower that you may have. The first thing that you want to make sure you're doing is actually making the hole bigger than what you need. And by bigger, I mean both diameter wise and depth. This is really important if you have a clay soil, which is what I actually have in the area that I planted these bulbs. You're definitely going to want to make the hole much larger diameter wise, but also depth wise than what the bulbs need. If you have light fluffy soil, then this may not be a necessary step for you. But in my case, I have heavy clay soil. While I could amend it, that entire flower bed is nearly planted with bulbs, perennials, and things like that. And that was prior to me even moving in or living in this house. That's how it was when I bought it. So rather than ripping everything out and redoing it and trying to get rid of the heavy clay, what I've decided to do is just work with what I got. So while people hate on clay soils or heavy clay soils because of, you know, the brickiness of it and its ability to make very solid landscape features, you can work with clay if you have it. So in this scenario, that's what I'm doing. What you're going to want to do, because clay is very low porosity size wise, and it can compact very easily, you could amend it in that hole with some peat moss or whatever the case is, wood chips, sand, even things of that nature. But what I did is I actually just dug out a relatively deep pit, and then I backfilled it with the soil that I then broke up. Of course, yes, that soil is going to recompact over time, but the plant roots combined with the fact that I won't be walking or stepping in that area anymore is going to help alleviate the symptoms just slightly of compact clay, so the plants will be able to navigate and work in that area. When we have a clay soil, we can use the benefit of its ability to retain water or actually affect the hydrological flow of water through the entire profile itself. And that's exactly what you're doing by making a larger diameter and a deeper hole with a little bit of backfill in. What we're doing then is we're making kind of like a sink for the water to go to. That flower bed is incredibly hot. It's full sun. And if I didn't have some clay in that soil, I would be watering that flower bed at least twice a day in midsummer just to keep anything alive. That is how warm that flower bed can get. So instead of making it so it drains better and it doesn't hold as much moisture, I've decided to work with it. So bigger hole diameter wise, bigger hole depth wise, I backfill it, and now I kind of have like a sink area where the water will pool. just underneath the roots. So the depth is kind of up to you. I probably dug at least a foot hole, and the allium and the garlic both only need to be about 5 to 6 inches below the level of the surface of the soil, meaning I went an extra 6 inches or so above and beyond what the depth needed to be, just to put that into perspective for you. The next step is we're actually going to want to look at the top versus the bottom. Now, anyone who's planted bulbs may have already planted some upside down and they came up anyways, and they will. If you accidentally plant your bulbs the wrong direction, trust me, plants are smart. All that's going to happen is your roots are going to come out the top and they're going to eventually go down, and then the stem is going to go this way. The only worry is that if the bulb isn't big enough or it doesn't have enough energy storage to actually do the flip and have the energy to get to the surface of the soil, you may end up with a rotted or a dead bulb. That does happen, but for the most part, plants are able to sort this out perfectly. If you just want the best results or you want the best bang for your buck, then make sure the root mass, which is the scar, it kind of looks like a belly button, which is essentially what it is, of the bulb. You want to make sure that belly button is facing down, and then the area without the belly button is facing directly up. Now for cut flowers, I don't know if this is a rule. I don't know if this is what you're supposed to do or what professional gardeners say to do, but my logic is to actually plant in circles. The reason for that is typically one bulb means one stem, and if you start spreading these plants out, then you aren't going to have the group support that you would get if you were to cluster them together. That group support is going to prevent against snap stems and just floppy looking plants, weak looking plants, sick looking plants. And it's going, if we are clustering them together in some form, we're using like a support mechanism of surrounding plants to protect against wind, water retention. Water actually will retain better in areas with a larger root mass and a closer area, and so many other different reasons for it. So I do like to cluster all my flowers together. Now, one thing I do not do is cluster them closely together. The reason for that is because bulbs over time will multiply and they will make more bulbs, more baby bulbs. So to prevent from the baby bulbs being overcrowded or having to transplant within the first 2 years and actually giving this patch time to establish, I do like to space them out just a little bit. But if you space them out in a line, you start losing the cluster effect and etc. and so forth. So I do a circle pattern. You could do a square. For example, you could probably even get away with a rectangle, but I do a circle just because it's easier to manage, it's easier to weed around, and I find that it supplies the greatest amount of support with the most amount of spacing for it to be able to thrive for years to come, if that makes any sense at all. And I do that with all my cut flower bulbs that I've ever planted. The next step is to actually cover the plants up with soil, obviously, and then water. The water temperature that you're going to want to use, depending on what the scenario or the temperature is outside for you. Maybe you should go inside and grab some warmer water. In my case, I used the water coming out of the hose that was baking in the sun all day, and you just want a little bit warmer water. If you're using cold water because lines and stuff are starting to freeze outside or it's just getting really, really cold, then I suggest getting something room temperature, maybe a bit above. And this is just going to warm the soil around it, but also kind of, in my mind, keep the bulb from going into any sort of shock after being stored indoors in your home. You want to try to prevent shock as much as possible, and in my brain, this is one of the ways to do it. Now, when it comes to watering, again, depending on what your temperature is outside, all that fun stuff, how many plants are still currently growing in your garden, for example, will determine how often you have to water. If you have a lot of dead foliage and things have started to peter off, or if it's very cold outside, then you're probably not going to need to water again. You'll probably have enough moisture in that soil, in that area, to be able to supply the bulb with enough go-go juice to keep growing. You are just aiming, like we discussed in the last video, for some root establishment so that we don't end up with withered, dried up bulbs in the spring, but also not mucky messes in the spring either. So it's a little bit of a balance. We just want to establish those roots but not get a ton of active growth. So just monitor your water levels appropriately. But I would say in most cases, especially for cold climate gardeners, there's a very high likelihood that you will not need to water after the first watering, especially if you thoroughly soak the soil before and after covering the plants. So the last one is garlic, and I do my garlic again a little bit differently, but in my mind, it makes more sense than doing it in lines or drastically spread out. In my experience, they do a little bit better in clusters. It's like they talk to each other, or they like to make friends with one another. But I do find the garlic and the cloves tend to be a lot larger when they have a tiny bit of a support system beside them. So besides breaking up the cloves, the whole cloves, I will split those up into separate units, which you should already be familiar with. Again, we're looking for the belly button versus the top of the plant, and then we're simply putting the belly button then we're simply taking the belly button and we're putting it down towards Mother Nature, so the ground. And then I like to plant mine in threes. I like to envision the size of a garlic clove and make sure that the spacing is appropriate, but that they're close enough that they can gain some benefit to that closeness. Garlic in the wild or in nature would never have been planted in straight lines far spaced apart, and the last time I did that I ended up with very small cloves, or some that just didn't develop cloves really at all. So this is my suggestion. I plant in threes, I plant in a rectangle, and then between the threes I add a little bit more space, so probably double or triple of what would normally be planted if you were to plant in the three with a three in a triangle. But that's all I have for you guys on bulb growing. I hope this helped you out. Let me know in the comments below if you have any specific pattern that you like to use, whether that is a line or if you have a specific way that you like to do your cut flowers that you find works best. I'd love to know what you guys are utilizing, what methods you're utilizing. I have found, like when I first started gardening, had tiger lily bulbs, which are really popular here in Saskatchewan, and so I planted them. And then the few years later, I was digging up dirt and I ended up lifting out some tiger lily bulbs that were in a patch together. So then I decided to experiment, and I actually took just a couple of the bulbs, not many, and I planted them in a different area of my garden, and I noticed right away when they started coming up and growing, they were drastically different when they weren't planted in a group, like in a cluster together. I ended up with really spindly, odd stems. The leaves were really tiny too. Some of them didn't even develop any flowers, and some of them actually didn't even stand up at all. They were like slithering along the ground. So that's what I've noticed with bulbs when you plant them. If you don't plant them in clusters, in my experience, that's what tends to happen. So I don't know if that's your guys' experience or not, but I will talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.